Very advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic.
Who hasn't heard of Brian Longwe? I think he's one of the original OGs of the ecosystem, especially the infrastructure, communication, internet infrastructure community. Over the last 20 years, he's one of those guys who has been pretty much responsible, one of the people pretty much responsible for where we are internet-wise.
When the internet started in Kenya, there was the challenge of most of our local traffic leaving the country. So if you're in Westlands sending an email to somebody on Mombasa Road, your email will have to leave the country maybe all the way to Netherlands and then come back to you on Mombasa Road. So that became a problem because it made the cost of connectivity very high.
I remember the first circuit we had to jump on it was, I think it was a 256K link or something like that, or a 128K link. And they charged us $2,500 per month for that.
I think there are things that he's also one of the curious entrepreneurial people that I know, one of the most curious and entrepreneurial people that I know. He has this ability to learn and see opportunities and grab them, then coupled with a desire to create a fairer society through the internet.
Brian, welcome to the show. Please tell us about yourself.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. My name is Brian Longwe, born in Aga Khan Hospital, Nairobi, on the 1st of August, 1971. So I'll actually be celebrating my 51st birthday come this 1st of August, 2022. Beyond that, I'm married with one wife, and we've got 3 beautiful children. Our firstborn is a girl, 20 years old, called Tamanda. She's currently studying at Daystar University in Nairobi, followed by 2 boys, one Kamoza, 18, and the other one Temwa, who's 15. Both of them are with us here in Malawi. I am the CEO of Converge Technology Networks, which is a internet service provider, a startup internet service provider that operates here in Malawi and has been running for the last 3 years.
Okay, just tell us a bit about how your early life in school, how you ended up in technology. You could probably even tell us when you first saw a computer.
Wow. Yeah, this is like sort of going way, way, way back. Huh? So I had a rocky start, actually, my education as a whole. I was ready to begin Standard 1 in Nairobi in 1977. But there was no public school that could accept me. My mom spent probably about 4 months at the beginning of that year trying to get me admitted into public schools. We went all over the city. And the main reason why I was not being accepted was because my dad was from Malawi. So they were saying, no, we only have places for Kenyans, full Kenyans for that matter. So I actually ended up missing school that year. Then come 78, or as we were getting to the end of 77, my younger brother, my immediate follower, his name is Delano. My mom calls us her special twins because we have a gap of we have a gap of 10 months. Can you believe it? 10 months between us. So you do the math and then figure out what happened. So anyway, it just happened that because I was born in August and he was born the next year in June. So come 78, he was ready to start Standard 1. So she now had 2 kids that she's holding by hand and going around school to school to see if she can get them admitted, and facing the same resistance. So eventually, my folks had to sort of bite the bullet and sought to get us admitted into a private school. And we ended up in St. Mary's in Standard 1 in 1978. So yeah, that's how we were there with a lots of ins and outs, because it is still an expensive school, and my parents really struggled to keep us there over the duration of 10 years that we were there. We ended up being expelled in Form 2 for lack of school fees. And then spent a year home and ended up in Ruiru High School, where we went straight into Form 3, chopped, and got ourselves ready for the exams the following year. That was 1990. So educational background was interesting, because of course, St. Mary's, we were there rubbing shoulders with all the sort of big wigs kids, but ourselves coming from pretty humble beginnings and background. We were in the first group that did the 844 curriculum. I remember how disappointed we were. We were in standard 6 when we were informed that we were not going to be finishing primary the following year, standard 7, as we expected, because we're in the first group that will do KCSE, so we have to do 2 more years of primary. And we're like, oh! So anyway, we did it, and 13 subjects at that time. That first round of KCSE was still experimental. I think it wasn't until maybe 4 or 5 years later that they sort of trimmed down some of the subjects. So we took the whole thing, the brunt of it. My first experience with a computer was probably in the early 80s, when some friends, it was a mixture. So there was a brand of computers called BBC, and they came and they held a sort of like an exhibition at the then very new Sarit Center. It wasn't as big as it is today in Westlands. And they had an exhibition, and I was just sort of completely captivated. They allowed people to sort of come and fiddle and, tap on them. And, the first day that it opened, I saw it being set up and I was curious. So the first day it opened, I was there very early. We luckily were on holiday. And I just sort of grabbed one of the terminals and just sat there just playing around. And the guy who was manning the exhibition, I think it was some guy from the UK or something, he was like, wow, you really look like you're interested in that. Why don't you hang around if you have time, and you can help me, sort of tell people who come about this stuff. Here's some literature that you can, read through, and you can be able to explain what this does and help me with demonstration. So I sort of, got a chance, and for the next, I think it was 3 or 4 days, I was there every morning, and I was so excited at this opportunity to, play around with this really exciting piece of technology. Around about the same time, a couple of friends of ours got personal computers in their homes. I remember both were Apple IIes, and we used them just to play games. And we would play games and play. After that, I didn't really have much contact with computers at all, because we couldn't afford one. I really wanted one. I really wanted to get hold of a Sinclair Spectrum ZX. At the time, they were selling at about 2,500 shillings, I remember, because I asked my dad if we could buy one. And, these were sort of like little, it was almost like, it looked like just a small keyboard. And what you do is you attach power, and then you attach it to your TV. It had like ports, video ports. You attach it to your TV, and you use your TV as the normal TV in the home as the screen. And I asked my dad if he could buy one for us, and he said, write me a proposal. So I ended up doing a lot of research and writing a 4-page proposal as to why he should buy us a Sinclair ZX Spectrum computer. And he rejected the proposal about 5 times. I had to rewrite it. It went up from, I think, 4 pages to about 8. And eventually I just sort of gave up, because he kept on sending it back with edits. I guess that was his way of sort of giving us a hard time as kids, and also teaching us the value of hard work. And instead of just saying, look, I don't have the money, I don't have the chums, you guys just chill, you know. Anyway, so that's sort of like a very quick snapshot at growing up. Yeah.
Somebody, I think, mentioned that you studied theology. That's an interesting perspective. Maybe you can talk about that a bit.
Yes. Yeah, that's very true. So it's interesting because when I finished high school, we were not able to get admitted to any of the public universities. Our grades were just not good enough. I had a C- in the KCSEs. My dad was like, yeah, you guys just chill, go around to the, British Council Library, Library of Congress. They have sections where they keep catalogs for international universities in the US, in the UK, wherever, and start applying. And we will organize and send you to school or to college out there. And I was like, Dad, you could barely manage to keep us in private school here in Nairobi, in Kenya. How are you going to be able to afford sending us overseas to, one of these colleges, which is, quite expensive? And we still have siblings, younger siblings that are still in school for you to take care of. So I told him, look, dude, I'm not going to sit around waiting for this. Let me just try and see if I can figure out my life kidogo. So I ended up sort of just getting out and trying to run around and look for something to do, look for work to do. In the process, which is maybe something we'll come to later, I came across technology. I got introduced to computers once again. I was selling grapes, literally, door to door. That was the hustle that I found to do. There was a guy who would bring in a truck of grapes from Tanzania once a week, and he would park somewhere down in Ngara. So I would go to this guy, buy 5 kilos of grapes, split them out into little bundles, package them nicely in clear plastic boxes, and then foot it in the Hurlingham neighborhood, Kilimani, Lavington, walking door to door, just knocking and selling grapes. And I was doing great business. I was making a lot of money doing that. Then one day I knock on this door in Kilimani, and the house girl answers, and I ask her if Madam is home, and she calls the owner of the house, and it turns out to be some family friend that we knew many, many, many years ago, that hadn't seen for a long time. A lady, I think she was an American, if I'm not wrong, either American or Canadian. I don't remember. But anyway, she's like, well, Brian, aren't you Brian Longwe, Frida Longwe's son? And I'm like, yes. And she's like, what are you doing selling grapes over here? Come in and sit down and tell me your story, have a cup of tea. So we talked, and I told her what's up. And eventually now she ended up telling me, look, I have a small computer here, a laptop. She had just gotten a little Toshiba laptop. And she said, look, you're a good storyteller. And anybody, have you ever thought of writing? And I told her, yeah, I used to love writing when I was in school, but I've never really thought about doing it. And she's like, any good writer needs to know how to type. So if you would like, you could come maybe for an hour a day and use my little Toshiba laptop. It has a program on it called TT, which is Typing Tutor. At that time, all the computers were DOS. There was no Windows. This is 1992. And, I was really excited at this opportunity. And the first day I came early in the morning, even before she had left. I think I was there like 7:30, and she was leaving for work shortly thereafter. She worked at Wilson Airport at Amref. And, I got started, and I was intending to be there for an hour, but before I knew it, she was back from work at 4:30 in the afternoon. I had spent the whole day on that thing. And basically that became the pattern for the rest of the month. Every single day I was there on that computer. I forgot all about grapes. I forgot about making money. I forgot about working. I was just obsessed with learning more. And learning how to type. So within a month, I was typing 40 words per minute with 100% accuracy. I was asking her to bring me books on computers, let me learn about Word. Actually, no, that time there was no Word. It was WordPerfect. It was WordPerfect and Lotus 123 and DBase, DBase 3 plus, all those old DOS applications. And she was like, you really look interested in this computer stuff. There is an opportunity at AMREF in our IT department. We're just computerizing, and our IT manager needs volunteers to help her do data entry. So I ended up taking up that opportunity, became one of the volunteers, and worked there for about 8 months. Soon thereafter, I found myself out on the street again, because things at home took a turn for the worse, and I needed to look for income. I wasn't really getting any salary. It was an unpaid internship or volunteership. We were given some small allowance for bus fare at AMREF. So I was on the street canvassing, looking for jobs and opportunities, and ended up working with some company called a startup called Memory Information Systems. I got hired there, and I worked there for about a year. But the boss, who ended up becoming, he was one of our recent member of parliament candidates, I think Kilimani or Milimani or something, a guy called Peter Wahinya. He was one of these entrepreneurs who, very tight-fisted. So we would get paid our salaries in bits and pieces, dribs and drabs. So we were all very frustrated. And 3 of us from that company left to start our own company in 1993, Corporate Computers. And it worked well until it didn't. We started making a lot of money. And when the money came in, all of a sudden, we realized that this partnership wasn't going to last because everybody had different ideas, different priorities. We were constantly arguing and fighting. One guy wanted to move out of his SQ that he was staying in Nairobi West and move into a big 3-bedroom apartment. Another guy wanted to stop catching Mathris to work and buy a big car. I was like, guys, let's put this money back into the business and, pay ourselves dividends at the end of the year if we've made profit, do the math. But that didn't go down well. So I ended up just sort of leaving that. And as I was on the street again now, sort of thinking and looking at what to do, I was actually sort of making some money by doing computer training in people's houses, in people's offices. And that time, I just really felt a strong call to salvation, to be completely honest, and really just to change my life and to get things right with God. So I ended up receiving Jesus as my personal savior. This is 1993. In the process, after several months, I felt this strong call to go and join East Africa School of Theology. So I actually stopped what I was doing, talked to my pastor at the time. I was at Nairobi Lighthouse Church at the time. And he said, yeah, you need to, obey what God is telling you. So I went and joined East Africa School of Theology in Buruburu. And I was there for about a year and a couple of months. And I was loving it. I was really loving the academic environment, learning, growing. Then come the second year, again, things took a turn for the worse back at home. And my mom's business completely collapsed. My mom was running a real estate agency, and it just completely imploded. She got conned. She lost a lot of money. She got conned by employees, by lawyers, and whatever. And basically, they couldn't even continue to afford paying rent where she was staying at the time with my siblings. The college fees and all of that, I was basically sponsoring myself. What I would do is work on the weekends. On the weekends, I would go back I would talk to my buddies at Corporate Computers, which was the company that we had set up. And, we'd go and do gigs together, do jobs here and there. And that's how I managed to take care of myself. Second year of school, at the beginning, things took a turn for the worse, and I realized, hey, I have to do something about supporting this family, otherwise it's not gonna be good. So I quit. I dropped out of college to go back to work. And that's when I started at ISP Kenya. I actually, in the process of looking for work to do, at the time they had email. They only had email. There was no internet yet. It was store and forward email. So I asked them if I could be doing sales and installations for them. They had a system by which they outsourced installers. And so I signed up as an installer, and I was getting paid 1,000 per month for each new install that I did. And I was so good at it and doing so many installations that eventually they sort of ran out of work for me to do. But I was still really hungry, and I was really enjoying this opportunity. So I told them, look, if I do the sales as well, and the installation, will you pay me the same, or will you pay me more? And they said, if you bring a new customer, and it's not somebody that we've had before, who was brought by another salesperson, we'll pay you 500 per customer, and then if you do the install, we'll pay you 1,000. So I was like, okay, cool. And I started doing that, and eventually I was bringing in so much that the check that was being written to me at the end of the month was more than their highest paid employee. So their MD, Yazim Nanji, says, who is this guy? Who is the guy? I'm not going to sign this check. Tell him to come. I need to talk to him. And he calls me in, and I'm like, he's like, I hear that you're doing an amazing job out on sales and installs, so much so that we're paying you this huge amount. But it has to stop. Either you come and join us full-time as an employee, or we are going to cancel this whole thing altogether. And I was excited at the opportunity to join. So I told him, yeah, show me where to sign. And he told me, you can choose either sales or technical. Which one do you prefer? And I chose technical and became the assistant to the technical manager at the time. He was the son of the Mexican ambassador to Kenya, a guy called Alejandro. And I worked under him for a while. Then when this whole new stuff about, the first time possibility to establish digital connections using via KPTC at the time, going through their satellite facility in the Rift Valley, we applied for a digital lease line to Pipex in the UK. And I remember working for, a couple of weeks, long nights, fighting to get that connection going, until eventually it got going. But I think I've run ahead of myself with this whole story, because you asked me about East, how I ended up there. Now I've sort of spilled over into other stuff. So let me just sort of stop there and see whether you had a couple of other things that you wanted to clarify about my earlier days.
Thanks a lot, Brian, on that introduction. Wow. I used to think I knew the history of Kenyan tech, but what you just shared is quite amazing. And it looks like the entrepreneurship bug beat you quite early in life. You spilled over to the ISP space, which fortunately I've been lucky to be part of in the early days, not as early as you. And there's been a lot that has happened in the space. And you mentioned about Formnet and doing emails, setting up email as a service to clients. At that time, I know the situation in Kenya politically was different. The regulatory space was also not, it was actually non-existent, so to speak. There was one incumbent in the country. And a lot of these new technologies that came in were viewed with a lot of reservations, especially from government. How would you put it? How are the early days looking like in terms of, were you facing any challenges in terms of getting new customers? Were you under the government radar for giving people an alternative means of communication? Remember, up to that time, radio was the primary means of public communication. And that's why in those days when there was a coup, the first thing the soldiers took over was the radio station, because that was the primary means of communication. And we are seeing that even today with the internet. So maybe you could take us through what a day or a week in the life of Brian setting up email services to customers looked like.
Yeah, so at FormNet, the system that was being used for email at the time was something, it was called a type of software called a bulletin board system. And it used a protocol called UUCP in the background to do the store and forward emails. So what would happen is we had an array of modems and people dial into these and they're able to check their mailboxes remotely with this client software that we've installed on their computers. And once they've dropped any outbound mail, our server would place a call to a system in the UK and push all the messages outbound to that internet connected system, which would then proceed to do the delivery. Then, of course, eventually, as I mentioned, things changed, and KPTC at the time was able to offer international digital list lines. And we set up a 64K link to Pipex in the UK. It was an individual connection. And at the very same time we were doing this as FormNet, Africa Online on the other side of town was also doing the same. And they also started with a 64K link. So the two companies, still today, we still sort of argue and debate about who went live first and was able to do a public demonstration of the internet. And shortly thereafter, it became, sort of very popular. We then had a number of different companies coming on in swift succession, Swift Global, Access, Interconnect, what was Sami Burushara's company called? NairobiNet.
NairobiNet.
Yeah, NairobiNet, and so on and so forth. I think Simba 2000. So, within a very short...
Net 2000.
Yeah, Net 2000, yes,
Yeah.
Net 2000. So within a very short time, you had like about 10, 12, internet service providers. And what was happening now was KPTC was really now finding itself constrained for resources to manage all these individual international list lines. So KPTC started something called JumboNet, which was now supposed to be the international gateway for the country. Essentially, it was at the time, a big international pipe connecting to a router, and the router just had many ports. Basi, that was what JumboNet was. And we would all have a port assigned to us, and they would configure a certain amount of bandwidth on the port that an ISP would be connected to. And the link from that particular router would come through something called the KenStreams network, which was at the time their digital list line service. I would say that at that time, the government of the day did not really appreciate or understand how powerful the internet could become. Internet was still considered a gimmick. It was still considered more of like a hobbyist type of thing. Most of the people using the internet back then were expatriates, people working with NGOs. It was not a household thing at the time. I would say the real game changer as far as the internet market was concerned came a few years later when Wananchi Online entered the market and for the first time introduced a internet package that cost 1,000 shillings a month. And that was hugely, hugely popular. And they became very quickly the biggest residential, internet service provider. But even then, the internet was still considered as something that was for progressive people. It was not considered as a platform that could be used for dissension or that could mobilize or affect the masses, because it wasn't a mass market thing yet. Not like, it is today with social media and all of that. So, very much the whole process of regulatory reforms and liberalization was also happening at the time. So KPTC ended up being split up into the postal, Telecom Kenya, the broadcasting KBC, and an independent regulator was established at the same time. The department in KPTC, which handled regulation, became CCK. And of course, that now began a different journey altogether for the country with regards to, just trying to harmonize and for them now to sort of come in and, a telecommunications regulator is a very interesting creature, because a regulator is not only there to ensure standards are maintained and to control the sector, but they are there also to, sort of create an enabling environment. They're there also to promote and cultivate the use of whatever technologies it is that they're regulating. So it took a while. Initially, of course, everybody who came into the regulator thought it's all about control and being heavy-handed and, strong-fisted. So it was an interesting time for us as ISPs, because we now all of a sudden found ourselves fighting almost daily with this new company or new organization, CCK, that really wanted to manage us, in a manner of speaking. Yeah.
Interesting, because I think at around the same time when the regulation was happening, was the same time that I was also experiencing the internet. I remember there's a time, I think in 1998 or thereabouts, where I had to travel from my rural home, about 300 kilometers away from the city, to come and register an email address. And my first exposure to the internet was actually, and you're very right, most of this was in NGOs and consulates. My first exposure was actually at the French Cultural Center, where I got to use the internet for the first time. And as you'd imagine, it was all new to me. And at that time, I was being told, if you register an email account, then you can be able to communicate to universities abroad and apply for scholarships and all that. So that was the main aim at that time. But the history you're giving us actually shows that there was more to just using it as a tool. At that time, there was a lot that was involved in making it work. Those days, if I'm not wrong, most of these systems were Linux-based or Unix-based. And you needed to be quite the expert to even send an email at that time. And a lot has changed. What I'd like to know from you is, in your days of FormNet, at FormNet, did you guys start seeing how big a deal this was, or you are just experimenting on this new thing that looks interesting, that some NGOs are interested in? Were you cognizant of the fact that this is a new thing that is going to take over the world, or how was it at that time?
Let me tell you mine. When we launched the sort of live internet, the one where you could actually dial in and go on and browse, right? One thing about Yazim Nanji and his wife is that these guys were real visionaries. They had grown up mostly. They were Kenyan born, but they had grown up and gotten educated mostly in the UK. But besides that, they were extra. They were really charismatic and very big imagination. So the launch was actually organized at Serena. So we had commandeered the entire ballroom of the Serena Hotel and invited the who's who: government, diplomats, captains of industry. That room was packed. In fact, till today, when we reminisce, we say, if somebody had thought about just sort of blowing up that room, it would have messed up the country for good, because it had literally everybody who was anybody at the time. This is 1998. And I remember we had this little compact desktop computer, and we had set it up in the middle of the room. with a modem next to it and a telephone line hooked up. We actually had to apply for a special landline to be connected by Telcom, by KPTC to that boardroom, so that we could have a direct line out instead of having to go through the hotel intercom or whatever, PABX. And we were able to dial into the servers. Now, the reason I'm saying this is because the moment that modem sort of started shrieking, whatever, and connected to the internet, and we used, what was the name of the browser that time? Netscape, yes.
Yeah, there was
Netscape browser.
Netscape
yes.
Navigator.
Yes, Netscape Navigator. Yeah. So we opened up Netscape Navigator and opened, I think, I don't know which website we first opened, and everybody was like, oh my God. And, you know, for the rest of the evening, about 4 hours, up until midnight, people were just coming and doing stuff, you know, It created such an appetite. We were selling modems at that time for something in the region of, I think we were selling each modem at 6,000 shillings. At the time, $1 was 60. So that's $100 a modem. And then we had our internet connection packages, which were, if I'm not mistaken, the basic connection was 6,000. So the first payment a customer would make would be 12,000 shillings. They would get actually 15. 6,000 for the modem, 3,000 for the install, 6,000 for the first month of internet. And then after that, they would pay 6,000 every month for their subscription. We were making money. It was crazy. Within about 3 months, we had 1,500 subscribers connected. Within about 6 months, 8 months there, we had 2,000. Within a year, we had 6,000 homes or individuals or whatever connections. So you can imagine, just do the math. You know, each of these guys was paying 15,000 to connect, right? And then after that, 6,000 shillings per month. And this is a monthly
for
subscription.
What capacity was that?
At the time, the connect, you know, those are modems, right? So you're talking about 14.4K. Yeah, a 14.4K connection.
14.4 was an upgrade because the default, the initial US robotics modems used to do 9.6
9.6K. Yeah, then they came out with another version which was able to do 28.8, and that was like, wow, now we are flying, you know. So yeah, it was incredible, and that went on for a while. You know, I was at Formnet until 1999. Towards the end of 1999, I just sort of had to quit because I had been working like 18-hour days ever since I started, and I was completely burnt out. I would sleep in the office. There are times I would not go home for like 3 days. I'm in the office. Siku tatu. I just go curl myself up under the desk in the server room. Guys come in the morning, they find me. You know, it was crazy. It was insane. And I was totally burnt out. And one of our customers actually at the time, a Christian organization based at Wilson Airport, Mission Aviation Fellowship, had an email service that they were using, giving email to the missionaries that they would fly to different places around the country. So they needed somebody to run the email service. At the time, initially, the email was being provided out of the UK, so they wanted to set up a Nairobi-based hub that would provide email to Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, and they needed somebody to run that. So the Dutch administrator at the time reached out to me and asked if I would be interested. I remember I'd gone over to their offices. Their offices were somewhere along Abingskodek, and I had gone to do some support. And I remember complaining to the guy saying, I'm so tired, I'm so worn out, I'm really struggling at my place of work. He was a very nice guy. And he was like, would you be interested in a quieter environment? We're looking for somebody with your kind of skill set. So we negotiated, and the guys offered me a job, and I took it and left. So that was towards the end of 1999. No, not end of 99, end of 97, 98, somewhere thereabouts. Yeah, 97, end of 97. Then I left and worked there until some point around 1999, actually, at which point I bumped into, I remember we were leaving, what was it, Uchumi? The Uchumi on Ngong Road. The Uchumi on Ngong Road, which was just across the road from Naila, the iHub and Nilab. We had gone shopping there with my wife. By this time I'm married. And we were leaving, and as we were joining Ngong Road, we passed a car, and I just heard somebody shouting and screaming from that car. And I turned to look, and it's my former boss, Yazim Nanji, and he's like, "Brian, I'm looking for you. Stop, stop, stop." So we pulled over by the bus stop. And he turned his car around and came, and he's like, "Where have you been? I've been looking for you all over Nairobi." And I'm like, "No, Yaz, what's up? I'm around." And he's like, "I want to start another ISP." So I'm like, "What happened to Formnet?" And he's like, "I was screwed. My shareholders did me a dirty. It's taken me 2 years to get my money." Now, at the time, this guy made the mistake of getting into bed with the wrong people. When he was setting up the company, he got into bed with Joshua Kulei and Ahmed Jibril, who are all kind of Biwot's right-hand men, Mr. 10%. So, these guys, essentially walked in one day and just told him, bounce. At the point when the company was making a lot of money, they just told him bounce. And he's like, "What do you mean bounce?" They just told him, "Chomoka, wende, na tusikonde tena." So he left, and he then fought for 2 years to get his shareholding paid back to him, and eventually took the intervention of Moi at the time to set things straight, and he got his money back, and he decided to start another ISP. So he was looking for me to join him, and we ended up then setting up ISP Kenya with a couple of other guys, Sunny Mangat and Hamish Govani. Hamish was the CFO. So we teamed up, 4 of us. Hamish and Sunny were the founders of Acropolis, which was the big Microsoft distributor at the time. And they were good friends with Nanji, with Yazim, and we teamed up, the 4 of us. In fact, initially, when we started the company, we were working out of one room at Acropolis's offices on Vuli Road in Westlands. Until eventually we were able to get our offices at Central House in Westlands, and just sort of go big league, in a manner of speaking.
Oh wow, awesome. So at this time you're starting ISP Kenya. There are other people also starting up ISPs, with the likes of Sami Buruchara. At that time, Africa Online was also doing very well.
At that time, they had already become UUNet, I think. They had already...
actually, UUNet was a joint venture. UUNet was actually a joint venture between Africa Online and UUNet South Africa. UUNet, to form the UUNet Kenya unit. And I think their strategy then was to have Africa Online deal with the mass market and UUNet focus on the enterprise. That's quite an history, because when I look at you saying that you are charging 6,000 Kenya shillings for what is basically 9.6 kilobit per second link. For someone who hasn't been in that space, that might look like a lot. Right now, with 6,000, you're getting 60 Mbps on Zuku, for example.
Imagine.
When you're talking of 60 Mbps on Zuku, those days when you are mentioning about the international gateway, the entire capacity of that gateway wasn't even 60 Mbps at that time. So a lot has happened.
No, it wasn't.
Yeah. I usually tell guys, there was a time when we sold a 512 kbps link. 512. That's half a Mbps. We sold it to the World Bank at that time, where we used to work. We actually had a happy hour for the entire company. That was a huge sale.
That deal.
512. Yeah. So and traffic started growing at that time. The use for internet started, and as more ISPs came into the space, the need for these ISPs to start exchanging traffic locally became more apparent. And at that time, there was a lot of push because I give you a scenario. If you have a ISP Kenya user in Westlands, let's say in Sarit, and he sends a mail to a Wananchi user across the road, that email had to leave the country and come back again to this user across the road. That ended up becoming very expensive. So what happened in the industry at that time, and what necessitated the need for you guys to, because there must have been an inflection point where you are all operating independently and then saw the need to come together in a loosely formed organization to basically try and make things better for yourself. Yeah. So could you maybe like give us a brief history of the local Kenyan internet exchange scene at that time, what necessitated it, and what role you played in that?
Yeah, so internet routing is very, very critical, and everything rises and falls on the efficiency with which a network can be able to route its packets or switch its packets. So if you recall, I mentioned that at the beginning, right at the start, each individual company would have to get its own international lease line, digital international lease line, and terminate that with a service provider on the other side that would be able to then now connect and route the packets to the internet. So by virtue of that, what would happen is the IP addresses that would be used on the ground would be a block assigned by that upstream provider. So we all as companies had different IP addresses coming from all over the place. Some international lines were terminating in the US, some were terminating in the UK, some were terminating in Germany, Netherlands, wherever. And of course, as a result of this, the traffic flows were extremely inefficient. Everything was tromboning. We would call it tromboning, the instrument which goes like this. So an email would go out internationally and then come back. Because yet it's just going literally across the street. So we started talking about this problem initially at the East African Internet Association. The East African Internet Association was a loose gathering of individuals who were just interested in tech. And it was established long before even like full internet was there, when it was the days of bulletin board systems, something called FIDONET, which was the initial network along which email, store and forward email, was being pushed via UUCP. So back in those days, we started, so East African Internet Association started talking about this. How can we fix this problem? It's just not, it just doesn't make sense. So with the announcement of JumboNet, everybody was excited because we now said, okay, with JumboNet, we get all our IP addresses from one place, and that should help us because now at least we can have our emails just going through JumboNet and coming back to us. But economically, it became a challenge because JumboNet was not differentiating between local traffic and international traffic. So the high price we were paying for bandwidth at the time, I think I remember the first circuit we had to JumboNet was, I think it was a 256K link or something like that, or a 128K link. And they charged us $2,500 per month for that. We eventually upgraded, I think, to almost to 768K, and that was costing us almost $10,000 per month. And that's less than a meg. So the prices were high. The prices were high for JumboNet, but they were lower than the international private lease line. So that was the incentive for ISPs to switch over to JumboNet. So we had this conversation with Telkom Kenya, and we tried to talk to them about, can you differentiate, so charge us for the traffic that's going internationally, charge us an international rate. For the traffic that is coming local, charge us a local rate. Charge it like a Ken Streams or whatever. But they wouldn't have any of that. They were like, no, whatever. So we started looking, okay, how can we optimize not only the appetite from our customers for more bandwidth, but also this internet routing. So one by one, we started. And this was a very interesting phenomenon. We started setting up what we call TV receive only satellites dishes.
Yeah.
So think about satellite TV, okay, DSTV and so on and so forth. That uses a particular type of IP to, a protocol, the DVB IP standard is what is used. So some clever guys had managed to figure out a way of having a TV receive only satellite dish receive your return traffic. And because the internet, especially back then, now it's a little bit different because you have a lot of just sort of interactive traffic. But back then, you could say that about 80 to 90% of the traffic that was coming to the country was return traffic. So you send out a request like for a website, www.bbc.co.uk or .com, and the return traffic is this huge amount of data and text, right? And that was typically the pattern. So we were able to negotiate and get very low rates for on a receive-only basis, and we would then be able to keep a very small connection for sending out requests and a big connection for receiving traffic. Now, for that to work, we then had to use now the IP addresses of that TV receive-only service provider as the requesting for the requests. And this now became interesting because it further compounded the problem. And we ended up finding ourselves back in the scenario where previously now you had all this traffic going through Europe, through Asia, through wherever, America. So while we were able to improve the economies or the financials related to service provision and get more bandwidth at a lower price using this approach, the actual efficiency of our networking took a hit, because on one hand we have the latency of a satellite connection, and on the other hand now we have unnecessary local traffic that's going over that satellite connection. So if somebody sends a big email with a lot of attachments across the city, that would really choke up bandwidth on both of the providers, because one provider's connection is receiving, the other one is sending. So how we ended up tackling that issue was that at some point I came across an announcement for an internet, some training by the Internet Society in the USA. And there was something they had then called the Networking Workshop for Developing Countries. It had been running for a couple of years, and I applied to it and was accepted. And they actually told me, we'll give you a full scholarship. You don't have to pay the fees. I think the fee was about $2,500 or something like that for 2 weeks of training. So, or was it 3 weeks of training? So I went to my boss. At the time, I was still at Mission Aviation Fellowship. And I told him, boss, I really need this training. I think it will help us and it will improve internet. Could you pay for my ticket? I don't mind using my leave days for the training, but could you please pay for the ticket, because I can't afford it. So he said, no problem, we'll do that. And got me a return ticket to San Jose. This is 1999. I went through the training. It was amazingly incredible. Got trained by some of the best minds, some of the founders of the internet, guys who wrote the DNS protocol and many other standards that we run the internet on were there. Got to meet people like John Postel, and so on. And in the process, this team from Cisco are the ones who taught us how to deal with this internet exchange issue and how to build internet exchange points. And I realized, wow, you mean it's really this easy? Okay, not that it was easy, but it's just that it was a different branch of routing that wasn't very common. At the time, we were all running static routes for our networks because they were so simple, one way out, one way in. So we learned about dynamic routing, we learned about BGP, and I got so excited, and I cornered one of the guys from Cisco, and I told him, we need you guys to help us set up an internet exchange point in Kenya. And he said, if you can be able to bring together 2 or 3 or 4 ISPs, we will donate the equipment. We have a program in Cisco where we give equipment away for countries that want to set up internet exchange points. And we will send an engineer to come and help you set it all up. But you have to meet these initial requirements first. So I hit the ground running when I came back from the US, and I started going knocking doors at the and talking to the CEOs of all these companies, the MDs and CEOs, Jonathan Soman, Richard Bell, of course, Yazim Naji, my own at the time CEO, Sami Buruchara, Gilda Odera, Tej Bedi, and we got 4 companies that agreed to connect. We then sort of started thinking and figuring out, where do we put it? How do we sort this out? In the process, TESPOC was established, the ISP Association. And I was ISP Kenya's representative on the board of TESPOC. So we then decided, look, let's just rent a room, because we can't agree on a neutral location for this thing. Nobody trusts the other. So why doesn't TESPOC just hire an office? And we chose Bruce House. And once we had the premise, once we had the links terminated to that premise, we then told Cisco, and we told them, guys, we're ready. And we were 4 of us that have come together. Can you come and help us set this up? And Barry flew over, and he was in Kenya, I think, for about 3 or 4 days. And we spent a lot of time sitting, mostly evenings, at Bruce House configuring our networks. We had to first of all reconfigure our internal networks before we could actually, connect to each other. But we did that, and packets started flowing, and it was amazing. Yeah, so that's how kind of KXP came about.
Wow. So there's something you mentioned which had actually skipped my mind. Is that at that time when you had a connection to the internet as an ISP, the download came via the satellite.
The satellite, The TV receive only.
Yeah, TV receive only DVB T at that time. Then it moved on to S when efficiency.
DVBS.
Yeah, to DVBS.
Yeah.
Then at the same time, your uplink is via JumboNet, which is a government body.
JumboNet. Yeah.
There are theories that was done deliberate by the government so that they could have control, because if your uplink is not there, if they switch off your uplink, then you're effectively out. So to prevent ISPs from being totally independent and unmonitored, you could not do up and down on your own satellite dish. You needed to do down only and have the government do for you up. It was a very chaotic time because the app was full. The ISPs were buying a lot of capacity down, but the app was full. I believe that is where now the agitation of this newly formed organization, TESPOC, started. We started seeing a lot of activity by TESPOC to push for this to stop happening, for them, for the regulator to license international gateway operators. And at around the same time when the likes of KDN were coming on, Kenya Data Networks, we saw a push by most of these ISPs to be given their own licenses. The regulator gave them licenses, but told them you can only do download, no upload.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Mm-hmm.
What did you say were the motivating factors, other than trying to improve the quality of service, that made this TESPOC team start agitating for more liberalization of the space?
So it was really interesting at the time. We were all in cutthroat competition. Our salespeople were in the marketplace, literally killing each other to get customers, right? And competition was intense and fierce. Undercutting prices, all kinds of very backhanded tactics being used to stay ahead. But we all had a common, let me not use the word enemy, common problem. And this common problem was, of course, JumboNet, one, the high cost, the quality of service. And I mean, there was a time I remember when JumboNet was down for like 3-4 days. The big satellite earth station in the Rift Valley,
Longonot.
through which JumboNet, Longonot, the one through which all connections were going at the time, ilianguka. And it took them like 4 days to sort of, because that thing was massive, 30 meter diameter.
There were actually two.
That's a massive thing. Yeah. So it was a nightmare. We didn't have internet. The whole country didn't have any, not just internet, any international voice or anything. So those were some of the problems, right? Then, of course, there was the issue of the internet exchange traffic, and there was the issue of voice over IP. So those three things are the ones that brought ISPs together. Those are the three things that were put on the table for the formation of TESPOC. And the value proposition was, we've all been trying to fight for these three things alone, and we're not getting anywhere. We need to speak as one voice. We need to be able to also distance our companies from the lobby, because otherwise we get individually targeted, and it had already been happening in a way. So TESPOC was established. Those are the three main agendas that were put up: international gateways, internet exchange point, and voice over IP. The objective was to push and lobby CCK to permit these. And it was really interesting, and we had a lot of learning. We learned a lot of lessons along the way. We had to sort of reach out and engage with similar organizations that had gone through this process in other markets, and learn how to lobby. We had to learn how to write position papers. We had to learn how to do sort of behind the doors or behind the scenes diplomacy, at the same time as we are doing very public noise making, literally pushing out press releases every now and then, and demanding this, demanding that, but at the same time, behind closed doors, taking time to educate the policymakers, taking time to educate the regulator and whatever. Because as much as they would want to claim that they knew everything, the fact is that most of the guys at CCK that time, they had just come from a small department in Telkom Kenya. All they knew was voice and voice. They didn't know anything about this new thing called internet. They didn't understand, even first of all, how this thing called internet operated, because if you looked at the regulatory issues at the time, the regulatory issues, as you said, were more to do with radio frequencies, and not that much about things like these advanced technologies. So instead of just admitting and coming clean and saying, easy vitu hatuzielewi, able to elezeni how these things work, they just sort of took this very sort of posturing position of saying, we are the authority, we know everything, you follow this way. Anyway, long story short is that, after some time, and a lot of lobbying and a lot of also hand holding, because we literally at some point would end up going hand in hand with guys from CCK, taking them to places like ICANN. The first CCK official to go for an ICANN meeting, Michael Katundu. I went with him, tulienda pamoja, and I was taking him around, introducing him to sort of all the different people there. And eventually he now became a very regular face at every ICANN meeting. He became a very strong voice in the GAC, the Government Advisory Committee of ICANN. And Kenya till today has a very strong position and in such an international forum. But it all started at the behest of the ISPs. Of course, at the same time, we also worked very closely with CCK to do the reassignment of .ke. I think that achievement also strengthened the relationship between ISPs and CCK, because for the first time, I think CCK began to realize, okay, these ISPs are not only selfishly trying to push for their own profits. They actually care about moving things forward as a country. because they saw the extent to which we as TESPOC were able to engage in the fight to move .ke back home and set up KENIC, and the level of support and the level of cooperation and collaboration that we were able to display, working hand in hand with them, and going out onto the international scenario and really arguing the case and lobbying internationally alongside them for the redelegation of .ke so that it could be assigned to KENIC. So it was very much of a love and hate relationship. I think it was early days, and TESPOC, I think, really found its strength by ISPs being able to set aside competition. They would leave it at the door. Whenever we came to a TESPOC meeting, we'd say, leave the competitive issues at the door. Tukae chini, let's figure out our common problems, common issues, and jointly think about how to solve them and how to fix those problems. Yeah.
Wow. So you mentioned Bruce House. You mentioned that you settled on Bruce House. Was it because of the proximity to the telecom exchange, or what necessitated you guys to choose Bruce House as your first KXP location?
Yeah, so there was a guy at KPTC called Wasonga.
The famous Wasonga, yes.
Yes, Wasonga. Now, Wasonga knew KPTC's data network like the back of his hand.
Yes,
you could ask him, naweza pata connection hapa? And he would tell you, there all the circuits are full. Or there, yes, you can get connection. Or there, no. So we went to Wasonga and we asked him, Wasonga, we need a place which has KPTC fiber